Morning, everyone. So, in the last class, we studied in custody, and I wanted to pay attention to how some of the post colonial concepts apply to the text. You can take some of the concepts and look at the story, the characters in custody, and see how they work out. As I've said, I've made a lengthy analysis of in custody on my website, and if you read it through from beginning to the end, it should give you an idea what the text is all about. Okay, so if you, for instance, look at the term ambivalence, you can see how ambivalence operates in the relationship between Murad and Devon. Because Murad looks down on Devon, but he knows that there's something that Devon is good at that he cannot ignore. That's what keeps their friendship. Even though he does not really like him, he has to come and see him just because of his knowledge. And at the same time, Devon knows that Murad is exploitative, even as a friend, but he cannot but keep the relationship because Murad has what he wants. And ambivalence is also seen in the relationship between Devon and the space in which he's staying at the moment and the work he's doing. He does not really like Hindi, but he goes to the university, studies it, and is now teaching it to people because of survival. So that's how ambivalence works in a novel. He would not have loved to teach Hindi, he would have loved to teach Urdu, but his relationship with the language is regulated by ambivalence. Okay, kind of love-hate relationship that exists between entities in a post-colonial space. If you take alienation, for instance, you could see that Devon is alienated from his cultural life. He would have loved to speak Urdu, but he is speaking Hindi. He's a displaced individual. Marginality, Devon is living a marginal life, a marginal existence, and his life is not fulfilled. If you take metropolis and the province, you see that in the novel, Delhi is the metropolis, and Mapri is the province. Delhi is the metropolis, and Mapri is the province. Actually, Mapri should be a metaphor for Maple, which should be the capital of Pakistan. But it's a space in India to show the cultural divide, that still exists in India as a microcosm, the division that existed between India and Pakistan shortly after independence. So you could see Mapri being a province is not love, it's not a place where somebody wants to stay in. Everybody wants to go to Delhi because that's where things are happening. So you cannot discuss a post-colonial space without looking at that dialectics of space. And double consciousness also plays out in the character of Devon. is conscious of two cultures. Homeliness and homeliness can also be seen in the novel. For instance, one of Devon's friends is no longer in India, he's teaching abroad. And sometimes when Devon sits down with his friend, with his colleague, Dev, they talk about how to leave India altogether to a space like the US. Okay? Meaning that they don't feel at home. Otherness. Devon occupies the category of otherness in the novel. His life signifies otherness. Subaltern. Devon is a subaltern. And so on and so forth. So that's how you're supposed to look at the novel. So we'll move on now and look at postmodernism, which is a very important theory at this time in literary discourse. And so if you're going to grapple with contemporary issues in criticism, you need to be able to, be grounded in postmodernism, which is one of the topics on our course outline. So postmodernism came as a reaction against modernism, which it tries to exceed, So postmodernism is a reaction against modernism. It tries to exceed modernism. It was popular in the 1950s, in the 1960s. But together with modernism, the origins go back to the 15th and 16th centuries. Which was marked by a celebration of whatever is new, liberal, and challenging. So postmodernism came because we perceived that there was something wrong with modernism, or there was a failing in the constitution of modernism. Normally, this is why we allow students to ask questions, we allow people to question existing theories, because out of that will come new ways of thinking, new approaches, and new theories. And which is why the educational space, especially in the university, should be a place where people are allowed to challenge limits and shortcomings. Which is why you need to train yourself to also do that, question things. So postmodernism is anti-modernism. It aims to correct the weaknesses of modernism, or the weaknesses noticed in modernism. One of such weaknesses is absolutisms concerning truth and reality. Modernism saw things in absolutes. One of such weaknesses is absolutism concerning truth and reality. Modernism tended to see things based on absolutes. Do not allow too much perspective. Saw reality as absolute. Absolutism concerning truth and reality was one of the weaknesses of modernism. There was something in the constitution of modernism that allowed the subjugation of the peasants. There was something in the constitution of modernism that allowed the subjugation of peasants, the oppression of little people. There was something in the constitution of modernism that allowed the oppression of workers, the exploitation of workers. There was something in the constitution of modernism that allowed the oppression of women. And there was also a failing in the constitution of modernism that allowed the otherization of the third world. The otherization of the third world. See the third world or colonized people as other. After all, colonialism was popular in the modern period. So it did not have modernism did not have an ideological practice that would have allowed us to see the third world people as other than exotic selves. So what one sees in all of this is that postmodernism is a theory or a movement, a critical practice, a critical gesture that aims to free all oppressed structures, aims to free up all oppressive structures, and to free up all oppressed structures, liberate all oppressed structures, bring freedom, bring light to wherever there is bondage and darkness, respectively. So postmodernism challenges absolutes and emphasizes relativity. Postmodernism challenges absolutes and emphasizes relativity. It does not believe in the existence of one perspective or truth. Rather, postmodernism believes in the existence of many truths, depending on the individual's perspective, which is why now we value individuals' opinion. We might not like what they've said, but it is what they've said. It is theirs, and it has to be respected. So reality is not absolute. There are many realities depending on who is looking and what one is looking at. Postmodernism emphasizes subjectivity. Modernism emphasizes subjectivity. Subjectivity is contrasted with objectivity. And subjectivity relates with the individual's viewpoint. That does not have to be accepted by others, but validated. at the same time. It might not be accepted by others, but it is valid. Subjectivity. Postmodernism encourages doubts, what we call skepticism. Skepticism. By doubt, we mean the individual has the right not to believe in what the individual feels should not be believed in. Which is why people should not be forced to believe. People should only be convinced, not forced. Postmodernism emphasizes deconstruction. Postmodernism emphasizes deconstruction. In fact, deconstruction, even as a theory, is one of the approaches under postmodernism. And if you know what deconstruction is, you know that it goes against existing structures and tries to reverse them. Deconstruction goes against existing discourses and even tries to reverse them. Deconstruction creates instability. In structural binaries, displacing and reversing them with new discourses. That's what happens with deconstruction. Construction creates instability in existing structural binaries and even reverses them, thus creating new and opposite discourses. So one of the critical gestures of postmodernism is deconstruction. For instance, if you have the binary colonizer, colonized, this is a structurally binary scheme with its modernist absolutes, where the item here is seen to be higher than the item here. Okay? But in a deconstructionist gesture approach, the deconstructionist comes in and reverses these structures. Placing the colonized here and taking the colonizer here. And then we'll go on to give you reasons why this should be so. And in all our discussion about colonialism, you can simply reverse this discourse. In any given way, if, for instance, this person said that this, in the conventional discourse, that this person was civilized and this one was civilized, you can reverse and say that this is actually the civilized. And you give reasons, not because you like reversing, but because you know that that's the truth. And this structure was a lie. So that's what deconstruction does. It comes in and displaces the discourse, reverses it, and then establishes a new discourse altogether. And that is the practice in postmodernism. Or even with the male-female structuralist absolutes binary discourse, the same thing happens. Okay? Postmodernism emphasizes individualism. By that, it is meant that the individual's viewpoint is valid in the postmodernist scheme. In fact, the idea of individualism and subjectivity go hand in hand, because the subjective perspective is usually individualistic. And so in the postmodernist structure, the individual is not compelled to hold on to dominant opinion. The individual is also free to say, this is my POV. And of course, you could see that most people make posts today and say POV. It's my take on the matter. I don't know what you think, but this is what I think. That's postmodernism. Doesn't have to go with the flow. The people say, I'll listen to what everybody has said, but this is what I think. And the person will also give his point of view. So postmodernism values individuals' perspectives on issues. It values individuals because those perspectives arise from individuals' experiences. And people are not expected to have the same experiences. And that is why we don't have one universal truth. We don't have absolute truth. We have many truths, depending on how the individual feels. So, to talk about postmodernism in that respect is to talk about post-truth. Talk about post-truth. So postmodernism is synonymous with post-truth. When the idea of truth has been destabilized, and so that we don't have one universal truth, but we have many truths, depending on who is speaking. Postmodernism emphasizes globalism. Postmodernism emphasizes globalism. In the sense that it aims to establish connections among people across spaces, across time, across cultures. It aims to establish connections among people across spaces, across time, across cultures. It is likely that what a certain people feel in a certain space can resonate with the experiences of other people in other spaces. Postmodernism aims at dismantling grand narratives. Postmodernism aims at dismantling grand narratives. Postmodernism aims at dismantling grand narratives. By grand narratives, we mean single stories. That is put forward and forced down people's throats as the only reality, only truth. It must be believed. don't call them grand narratives, we call them meta-narratives. They are single, large-scale, universal stories, widely spread and believed, and not easily questioned by anybody. These are grand narratives. So postmodernism aims to do what? Dismantle grand narratives. Instead, it embraces different perspectives on a particular issue. Modernism embraces different perspectives on a particular issue. So it is because of postmodernism that we have minority discourses today. Minority discourses today. Stories of people whose experiences were hitherto ignored because they were not popular, because they were not powerful, because they were not rich, because they were not strong. Today, these stories are in demand because of the framework of postmodernism. Stories of oppressed people, like women, like blacks, like LGBT communities. These are minority people. In fact, it might interest you to note that, the post-colonial discourse was given impetus based on the postmodernist framework. The postmodernist framework gave impetus to the post-colonial discourse. Because what is a post-colonial discourse? It is the discourse of otherized people. Okay? The post-colonial discourse is the story of otherized people. The story of oppressed, colonized people. So you could see that postmodernism is quite large and accommodates other discourses. That's why you could see overlapping terms when you study postcolonialism and postmodernism. Most of those terms were drawn from postmodernism. So the terms that you notice in postcolonialism were drawn from postmodernism. Except that postcolonialism deals mainly with the experiences of people who were previously colonized. As postcolonialism deals with the experiences of people who were previously colonized. Postmodernism is concerned with issues of marginality. It focuses attention on marginal experiences. So whenever you see a discourse that is oppressed, you can free up that discourse, liberate it by using postmodernism as a framework to approach that discourse. Okay? And we know the categories of people who occupy the margin: the women, children, blacks, okay? The poor. And in each of these categories, you can always identify the other aspect, the other category that is higher. Okay? Because, for instance, when we said the rich, when we said the poor, they are the margins. The center in such a discourse will be the rich. You say women, they are margin, they occupy marginal spaces. The center in such a discourse will be the men. So in postmodernism, emphasis is given to marginal structures, which are the oppressed structures in any given discourse. Postmodernism emphasizes ambiguity. Postmodernism emphasizes ambiguity. It emphasizes fragmentary representation. Because the discourse is never whole and complete. With deconstruction, we know that there is no whole discourses. Discourses extend as long as it's possible and then they break down. Then other discourses begin and continue. No discourse can be sustained for a considerable length of time. It tends to meet its aporias. Aporias. That's a point where they rupture. So you will need to know when your discourse has met its aporia, might met its point of rupture, when it has been destabilized by other discourses. Postmodernism is interested in the dismantling of the binary oppositions. That's the construction, the dismantling of the binary opposition. This is the binary opposition. Binary opposition. Most discourses are constrained by the binary opposition. Okay? Like men, women, adults, children, rich, poor. Okay? So here, maybe you can talk about feminism. Here you can talk about infantism. Here you can talk about Marxism. And any other discourse that might arise. Postmodernism breaks with dominant culture and aesthetics. Postmodernism breaks away from dominant culture and aesthetics. Instead, it recognizes multiculturalism and hybridity. We are living in a multicultural world. That is where postmodernism operates, where most individuals are hybrids. Which is why postmodernism calls for the respect of cultures, all cultures. A man of culture should show respect, should not look down on the culture of anybody. That is Chinese culture, Indian culture, African culture, Asian culture. No one culture is superior to another. All cultural values have to be respected. So, gone is the era when we only looked up to the European culture as the only culture. Why we play down on our own or even abandon our own. In postmodernism, we embrace cultural diversity. So you need to embrace cultural diversity. Same thing with aesthetics. Postmodernism doubts the possibility of representing reality. Postmodernism doubts the possibility of representing reality. Instead, it opts for irony and black humor. It opts for irony and black humor. By representing or rendering serious subjects with techniques such as representing or rendering serious subjects with techniques such as pastiche, parody, 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 paradox, irony, and temporal distortion. And temporal distortion. Pastiche, parody, paradox. So all of these are the stylistic gestures in postmodernist work. How reality is represented in postmodernist literature. Reality is represented in postmodernist literature through parody. Through pastiche, through paradox, through irony, through maximalism, and through temporal distortion. So black humor is also called dark humor. Black humor is a postmodernist technique. It is also called dark humor. It is so called because it accounts for tragic situations through laughter. It uses laughter to render very serious issues. That's dark humor. It's a tragic incident, but it is done in such a way that it creates laughter. Pastiche and parody are related. They are forms of imitation. work of art is said to be pastiche if it imitates another work of art at a particular time. Parody is also an imitation. Parody imitates a serious work of art in a humorous way. Parody imitates another work of art in a humorous way. The work of art that imitates is serious, but the parody of that work is humorous. This is the same pattern that pastiche follows, but pastiche does not have to be a complete work of art. It can be excerpts, it can be portions of a text, of a whole work of art. These are all postmodernist stylistic gestures. In case you have to analyze a text from the perspective of postmodernism and you can even use parody as a topic on its own. Then paradox borders on the absurd or absurd representation of reality. Absurd and ironic representation of reality. Paradox borders on the absurd and ironic representation of reality. Maximalism is a postmodernist technique. Maximalism is a postmodernist technique that makes use of digression, allusion, or references to other literary work, excessive explanation, which in the end creates a complex body of literature. Maximalism is the opposite of minimalism. Maximalism is the opposite of minimalism. Minimalism is mostly a modernist stylistic gesture. In which the author uses the fewest material possible to produce the literature. The author uses the minimum material possible to produce the work of art or to produce the work of literature. For instance, if the person is a poet, a minimalist poet will use the fewest words possible to create a poem. A minimalist art sculptor will use the barest material possible not to produce a work of art. Doesn't want to it will not be extravagant in using materials. This is the work. That's what we mean. So it depends on the domain of art that you're talking about. If you're talking about a painting, a minimalist painting does not use some elaborate colors and designs. Just the fewest colors possible, maybe one or two. Not even half color. To show that it doesn't use many materials. A minimalist writer will not use many words to create a work of art. Now, the opposite of that is maximalism. Maximalism is the technique of postmodernism, which uses many words, decoration, embellishment, long and winding sentences, draws from different sources. In fact, the work of art in postmodernist literature is like a research because it draws from different traditions. The work is embellished and it creates a kind of complex literature. And then temporal distortion. Temporal distortion. Temporal distortion as a feature of postmodernist literature. Temporality has to do with time. So this is a distortion of time in the work of literature. So such a work usually combines different temporal perspectives. Such a work usually combines different temporal perspectives. It can at once account for the past and the present and even the future. So in the postmodernist world, I like to come across temporality, split temporalities, a combination of present, past, and future in the text. Postmodernism also makes use of magical realism. An aspect of postmodernist literature is magical realism. Magical realism. This refers to the art of representing ordinary events and details together with fantastic and dreamlike elements. Magical realism refers to the act of, it's an aspect of postmodernism and refers to the act of representing ordinary events and details together with what? Fantastic and dreamlike elements. Postmodernism is post-structuralist in nature. Postmodernism is post-structuralist in nature. It is one of the post-structuralist theories. In fact, you can also call it post-structuralism alongside deconstruction because it aims to dismantle structuralism. It is dominant in the critical practices of the 1960s. It is dominant in the critical practices of the 1960s. Which examined the split between the linguistic sign and its referent The split between the linguistic sign and its reference. As well as how such a split could apply to history, texts, narratives, authors, and meaning. As well as how such a split could apply to what? History, texts, narratives, authors. When we say narrative, we mean stories, and meaning. Split between the linguistic sign and its reference, as well as how such a split could apply to history, texts, narratives, authors, and meaning. By this split, we are talking about ruptures in meaning. And it is well understood under the principles of deconstruction. The fact that sometimes signifiers can become signifieds. And because of that, it changes the entire discourse. And if signifiers can become signifieds, then it means that reality is not absolute. Realities keep changing. Truth, including truth, or what is considered to be truth, keeps changing. And so what was hitherto considered to be below can be above and could be so discussed. So meaning keeps changing, and meaning cannot be sustained beyond a particular discourse. Doesn't meaning cannot be sustained without beyond a particular discourse before it breaks down. Okay? If you start by saying that the man is the head of the home in the morning, by the time the discourse gets to evening, a lot of things might have changed, because in the evening you might see that the man is not collected anymore. Probably someone else has come in to be the head of the home in the evening. So the idea that the man is the head of the house might not always be true. Might be true to a certain extent before we recognize someone else's power. Okay, so if you are powerful in the morning, in the afternoon, or in the evening, your power might go down. Someone else can come in and show you that you're not as powerful as you thought. All right, still in the same house. Okay? So authority and power then becomes mere appearances. Okay? And limited by time. Okay, so that's where it gets interesting. So this kind of discourses changes how we view the author and how we view meaning. And so that's why you find in theories like reader response, intertextuality, and so on and so forth. These are all post-structuralist theories, which are better understood when the principles of postmodernism. According to Arthur Kissan, in an article entitled, going to Arthur Kissan, in an article entitled Postcolonialism and Postmodernism. Postcolonialism and Postmodernism, published in 2007. published in 2007. Postmodernism can be typified as a vigorously anti-systemic mode of understanding. Postmodernism can be typified as a vigorously anti-systemic mode of understanding, with pluralism, borders, and multiple perspectives being highlighted as a means of disrupting the centralizing impulse of any system. I'll take that again. Postmodernism can be typified as a vigorously anti-systemic mode of understanding, with pluralism, borders, and multiple perspectives being highlighted, with pluralism, borders, and multiple perspectives being highlighted as a means of disrupting and centralizing impulse of any system. I'll take it for the last time. According to Atkinson, an article entitled Postcolonialism and Postmodernism, published in 2007, quote, postmodernism quote, postmodernism can be typified as a vigorously anti-systemic mode of understanding, with pluralism, borders, and multiple perspectives being highlighted as a means of disrupting the centralizing impulse of any system. Unquote. So the borders, you see, like the borders. Another key proponent of postmodernism, Jean-Francois Lyotard, Jean-Francois Lyotard, in a work entitled The Postmodern Condition, published in 1984. Jean-Francois Lyotard, in a work entitled The Postmodern Condition, published in 1984. Says all forms of knowledge production as narratives or stories. Says all forms of knowledge production as narratives or stories. So whatever is produced in the cultural sphere is telling a story. All cultural objects are imbued with their own narratives, and that they tell stories. This is beautiful because everything around us becomes literature, because they are imbued with stories of their own. So dominant stories are called meta-narratives or grand narratives. Dominant stories are called meta-narratives or grand narratives. Dominant stories are called meta-narratives or grand narratives. Narratives are dominant stories. Narratives are dominant stories when they have single perspectives. Narratives are dominant stories when they have single perspectives. As dominant stories are grand narratives or meta-narratives. So they are dominant stories that are so-called when they have what? Single perspectives, which have been widely spread and believed without question over time. Which have been widely spread and believed without question over time. For instance, the statement that Mungo Park discovered River Niger is a grand narrative. The statement that Christopher Columbus discovered America is a grand narrative. It has been spread and believed over time, and people hardly can question it. So any discourse that comes along to challenge that discourse is postmodernist in nature. So according to Lyotard, the postmodernist discourse is marked by, quote, the postmodernist discourse is marked by, quote, incredulity towards meta-narratives. Incredulity towards meta-narratives. Incredulity means doubt. Does not believe in meta-narratives. It aims to displace, disprove meta-narratives. In fact, meta-narratives are what I call lies, grand-scale lies that have been told to humanity and believed over time to be true. For instance, white people are better than black people. White people are superior to black people. These stories have been told over time and it is believed. And most black people think that that is true. So to tell them the opposite is a daunting task. Okay? So any discourse that tries to set itself up as the only discourse, is aiming to be a grand narrative and must be displaced. It must be questioned, must be interrogated, must be subjected to the test of postmodernism, to the postmodernist test. So, postmodernism aims to dismantle these meta-narratives. That is the project, the whole project of postmodernism. So even as you speak, you can look around to see the meta-narratives around you and see how they can be dismantled, or how they have been dismantled by emerging literature. So postmodernism is in love with small narratives. Postmodernism is in love with small narratives. Postmodernism is in love with small narratives. which it privileges, privileges, which it privileges, which it privileges. Okay? That means it gives attention to, which it gives attention to, privileges. All right? As a verb. That is, postmodernism gives more attention, emphasizes, focuses on, elevates small narratives. Postmodernism emphasizes, elevates, focuses on, pays attention to, cherishes small narratives. Small narratives are stories that counter dominant stories by offering opposing perspectives. Small narratives are stories that counter dominant stories by offering opposing perspectives, by expressing opposing perspectives, by offering opposing perspectives. So postmodernism is also marked by indeterminacy, 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 indeterminacy. The issues are not usually completely resolved. It's only taken to a particular point where another discourse will begin another time. Because it's all about discourses. But each discourse is valid within its own argument, beyond which it begins to fluctuate. So no perspective ever presents itself as the only perspective. No discourse ever presents itself as the only discourse. It's valid within its temporality, within its ambit, and after that, another discourse comes up. That's why it is. That's how postmodernist discourses work. We don't get to a point where we say this issue has been resolved and this is it. Otherwise, you are going back to meta-narrative. You are going back to absolute truth, absolutism that was noted with modernism. So you just say your discourse and stop. Because who knows, another discourse will come another time and obliterate your own. It's also marked by ambiguity and referral. So marked by ambiguity and referral. In postmodernism, meaning is deliberately made irretrievable. Postmodernism, meaning is deliberately made irretrievable. 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 The texts ask more questions than provide answers. The postmodernist literature asks more questions than provide answers. It does not aim to have a final say, but to say what it can within the ambit of its discourse. In postmodernist theory, we have the proliferation of aporias. The proliferation of aporias. Proliferation of aporias. The proliferation of aporias. Okay? Proliferation of aporias. By aporias, we mean it's a term that we use in deconstruction to show where the discourse breaks down, where one discourse breaks down, where another begins. Okay? Because no one discourse can be sustained beyond a certain point. So it got to break down at a particular point. So by aporias, we mean breaks, ruptures. Aporias mean breaks, ruptures, disjunctures in the meaning of a particular text. The meaning of a particular text. Okay? For instance, if you say Heathcliff is the hero in Wuthering Heights. Yes, true. But can it be sustained throughout the discussion of that text? Because at the point it begins to break down, you begin to wonder whether it is actually a hero. Beyond certain points, discourses break down. And those points where they break down, we call them points of aporias. We have breaks, we have ruptures, we have disjunctures in the meaning of a text. No single meaning can be sustained in any given reading. No single meaning can be sustained in any given reading. No single meaning can be sustained in any given reading. Meaning can only be sustained within its own discourse. Meaning can only be sustained within its own discourse. Meaning can only be sustained within its own discourse. And nothing more. The key theoretical terms in postmodernism are the key theoretical terms in postmodernism are dissemination, dispersal, dissemination, dispersal, indeterminacy, hyperreality, pastiche, a work of art that imitates another work of art, the style of another work of art, parody, a composition that imitates or misrepresents somebody else's style, usually in a humorous way. That's parody. Bricolage. This refers to a work of art that is created, composed, or constructed from diverse range of available materials or things. Bricolage. A work of art that is created, composed, or constructed from diverse range of available materials or things. That's an aspect of maximalism. Because the postmodernist literature is full of allusions, references. All right? It's like a research on its own. So bricolage is a work of art that is created, composed, or constructed from diverse range of available material or things. So there's no purity. There's no purity in the creative process of the postmodernist literature. In other words, there's no originality in quotes. The work of art constantly draws from other works of art. The postmodern literature constantly draws from existing work of art, which is why it is full of pastiche, parody. All right? To read one postmodernist text is to read many different texts. There's no originality. One author is simply parodying another. So that's why you pick a collection of poems, and in the collection of poems you see Clark, you see Shoyinka, you see Black, you see different authors within the same collection of poems. That's a postmodern work. That's how it works. Difference. 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 The postmodernist literature is marked by difference. It's marked by aporia. It's marked by play. Marked by play. Because postmodernist literature draws from different cultural, literary sources full of allusion. That's why we can say that the postmodernist literature is intertextual. Postmodernist literature is what? Intertextual. Intertextual. Postmodernist literature is intertextual. So, intertextuality is a postmodernist framework. Then you have collage and montage. Collage and montage as elements of postmodernist literature. Collage and montage as elements of postmodernist literature. Collage and montage as elements of postmodernist literature. All right? So for instance, you look at the internet today, all the memes people are making, it is all montage and collage. It's postmodernism in display. Collage is a paste-up. It's a paste-up. Made up of sticking together pieces of paper or photographs to form an artistic image. Collage is a paste-up made up of sticking together pieces of paper or photographs to form an artistic image. That's collage. And it still follows that trend of postmodernist maximalism, which makes a work of art by drawing from different sources, different materials. Then montage is the technique of selecting. Montage is a technique of selecting, editing, and piecing together. Montage is the technique of selecting, editing, and piecing together separate sections of film to form a continuous whole. The technique of selecting, editing, and piecing together separate sections of film to form a continuous whole. So the montage literature also draws from different materials to create a new work of art. Most of the memes are based on the techniques of montage in collage. Which of the memes on the internet are based on techniques of montage and collage? So it can be seen that postmodernism can be used to study um, a text like the Satanic Verses by Salman Rushdie, the Satanic Verses by Salman Rushdie. So because of time, we will not go into all of this, but just know the text that you can use to approach postmodernist literature. You can use it to study the Lower River. This is Salman Rushdie. In fact, when I taught the course last, I used the Satanic Verse to discuss postmodernism, especially magical realism, because Rushdie is a master magical realist. Magical realism is an aspect of postmodernism. You can also use it to study the Lower River by Paul Theroux. All right. This was one of my primary texts from one of the primary texts I used in my thesis, my PhD thesis. It can still be studied if you are interested. There are many perspectives that you can look at. Lower River by Paul Theroux. This is X. You can use it to study the Secret River. The Secret River. Secret River by Kate Grenville. This text will be beautiful with postmodernism because it provides a counter discourse on the Australian Aborigines. Okay? It might interest you to know that the Australian Aborigines were black before the colonizers left England to Australia to take over the place and killed off the people. So there are very few now, and then they rewrote the history of the place. It may look like it was always occupied by white people, but the truth is that it was originally owned by black people, black Aborigines. And so this story, the Secret River, is a counter discourse that shows how Australia was a land of black people before the colonizers uprooted the owners of the land and took over the place, just by literally killing them off. So it will be an interesting story to approach from the person, because you'll be studying it as a counter narrative, as a small narrative. All right, countering the meta narrative of the colonizers. Working with shadows can also be studied using from the perspective of postmodernism, because the queer theory is an aspect of postmodernist literature. In fact, just like postcolonialism, the queer theory is given impetus through the framework of postmodernism. All right, so that's where we end our class.